Hi, this is Tim Mackesy from Atlanta. This morning's podcast is a discussion of interesting things, mysteries, and quandaries that surround stuttering. Some of them will never be solved. Some of them are clinically important from the standpoint they can be used therapeutically. Some of them invite more research than has been done. Some of them are brushed off as though they're not important, but actually they are. So let's dive into things like, why is it when I sing I don't stutter? What's a masking device? I can't hear myself and I don't stutter. How is it I can be in a character, voice, or act and I don't stutter? What's choral reading? I stutter bad when I read out loud, but when someone reads with me, I don't stutter. It's interesting. Let's begin with singing. During singing, the left brain and right brain work together more so than when talking. The corpus callosum is the highway between the left hemisphere, right hemisphere. A lot of times when we're singing, we know the words by heart. Plus, your voice is rising and falling, and your voice stays on in between the words. You put all of this together as the special sauce that helps explain why is it when someone who stutters sings, they don't stutter. Interesting also, some people after a stroke can sing before they can talk or hum a song. The most famous person, probably a person who sings but doesn't stutter when he sings, was Mel Tillis. We lost Mel a few years ago. His story had a really big impact on me personally. I followed his story. When I was approximately 10 years old, Mel Tillis was on The Carson Show. The Carson Show had a huge audience, live recordings. And Mel apparently had a swan at his farm. And when he was talking about his farm and the swan, he had a huge speech block. And he brought his arm up and made a motion kind of like the neck of a swan and was blocking. His head was moving up and down. And Carson started laughing. The audience started laughing and the world started laughing. And where I credit Mel Tillis for coming out and talking about his stuttering early, he also was exploited. His stuttering was a punchline. When Mel Tillis was cast for Smokey and the Bandit, his stuttering was a punchline. In his own autobiography, he talks about during the filming of the Smokey and the Bandit movies, if there was a scene that he was in and he didn't stutter, the director would shout, "Cut!" and they would refilm the scene until Mel stuttered, because Mel's stutter was the punchline. It is unfortunate that his stuttering was exploited. It was a time period when you could do that. I hope those doors have been closed and we're never going to see anything like that again. What's a masking device? Hopefully you've seen The King's Speech. The King's Speech won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The crux of the storyline, Logue was the therapist for King George VI. King George VI had to ascend to the throne quickly, and King George VI had a stutter. He was teased by his brother, and his father, King George V, was pretty stern with him about his stuttering. So in the movie, Logue had bought a record player from the States, and he played a record really loud while Logue had some earmuffs on, and or a headset would be the right term. The music was played so loud, King George VI really couldn't hear himself talk, and he read a passage very fluently. And Logue recorded that passage and gave it to King George VI. Something came out of that time period, a masking device, that you wore little earbuds in your ear, a wire went down to your belt, and on your belt you had a little button, and when it was your turn to talk, you would push the button, and a white noise would be emitted really loudly in your ears. You couldn't hear yourself talk, and you didn't stutter. But it was very awkward to use because most people would talk very loud then, and then you have to turn take. So I say something with my masking device turned up, and then you motion, and then I turn it off, and then you talk. Obviously, it's clumsy. It would also be, I don't think you could use it on the telephone or in different places where it's loud or chaotic. So masking devices came and went. But it's interesting, if there is noise that is so loud in my ears that I cannot hear myself, I don't stutter. On the internet a few years ago, there was a student in college. They did an experiment. He wore some headsets and they played white noise really loud through his ears. And he stood in front of a giant classroom and spoke and didn't stutter, and everybody broke into tears. So it's just very interesting. What allows me, when I can't hear myself, to not stutter? What's the psychology part in there? It's basically, I don't know I'm talking, I don't know I'm stuttering, and I don't. It's interesting. Because then it moves into choral reading. Choral reading, let's pretend a person, when they read alone, they stutter severely. But if someone reads exactly the same passage at exactly the same time, the person who stutters is fluent. It's been seen for decades. There were the PET scan studies by Fox and Ingham, where they took 2 samples from people who stutter. One was reading out loud, and then the other sample, to contrast, was choral reading. So with the PET scan, they showed that there was hyperactivity in the striatum, which is the speech area, during stuttered speech. Well, it makes sense to me that if I do this, did, that there's going to be activity in my speech cortex, lights up like a Christmas tree. If I say did, the activity is going to be different. So during stuttered speech, there was more activity in the striatum. Let's answer the question, why, if someone reads the same passage as me at the same time, I don't stutter? I think there's a lot of psychology in there. The spotlight is off me. I saw a demonstration with 4 adults who stutter severely. All 4 were reading together. All 4 were fluent. One was removed, second removed, third removed. When they got back down to one person, the stuttering came back. But any time somebody was reading in unison, the other people who stutter remained fluent. So the in-the-ear devices, the DAF, FAF, and other devices were an attempt to mimic the choral effect, which is basically an echo, if you will. So there's a delay on the DAF. So I say something, and there's immediately a delay. And the theory tried to approximate the choral reading. And those devices have come and gone through time. The Fluency Master was late 80s. The Speech Easy device came out around 2001. It got onto Oprah and Good Morning America. It had some flash for a while. We all know why it failed. There's a story on my website called Straight Talk on Fluency Devices, I believe. But if you go to my website, you can find my article, which I explain why the in-the-ear devices failed. And I stuck up my neck because I wrote it in 01 or 02, right when the devices were so popular. Now, the technology is so cheap that you can get an app for your smartphone and have DAF, FAF, and the similar technologies for next to nothing, maybe $50. but they just don't work as they're intended. They don't work when people have anxiety. So let's pretend I'm in sales and I fear that cold call or the first appointment trying to sell my product. I have anxiety. Anxiety will overwhelm the ability to attend to the signal in your ear. That's one of the reasons why those devices just seem to fail people who stutter when they need them the most. I know a lot of people who had devices that were $5,000 and $6,000, and they're still sitting in their sock drawers. Number 4 is character voices and acting. A lot of children discover when they go into a character voice or baby voice, they don't stutter. When Jim Carrey was doing the Mask movies and Ace Ventura, with that silly voice that he has, a lot of little boys who stutter were copying him and finding out they didn't stutter when they were Jim Carrey. And it's cute and everything, and they got a lot of attention. They were the class clown, and they weren't stuttering. It's like a bonus. But we know that's not a solution. You can't bring a character voice to college and to employment. And so those children have to learn different ways to speak the way they want without always going into a character voice. When we go into acting, it's interesting because we have people like James Earl Jones and Bruce Willis and Emily Blunt, who grew up stuttering. They tell us they stutter in real life, but in their movies, you've never heard them stutter. Now, those 3 actors and actresses alone probably have about 40 movies between them. You've never heard them stutter in their movies. And it's very interesting because it begs the question, how is it when I go into an acting role, a character role, I don't stutter? Movie after movie, movie after movie, decade after decade. When I'm a character, I don't stutter. Now, part of what helps is they know their lines by heart. That helps. Like when kids do the Pledge of Allegiance, if they know the words by heart, that tends to help. A bigger thing is the identity. Let's pretend I'm in high school and I'm going to take on the role of Caesar for a play. I've got all my lines. I'm 17 years old. I've been stuttering since preschool. Everyone knows I stutter. And I'm in a play at school as Caesar. And when I am the character, I have 0 stuttering in a 90-minute play, for example. And everyone's like, oh my gosh. So a key thing here is when a person who stutters goes into an identity that has no reference for stuttering, somehow they don't stutter. Go into an identity, a different identity, a character with no timeline or reference for stuttering. Some people will brush that off as lucky fluency. Well, it doesn't matter. It's not clinically important. I beg to differ. Many of these actors and actresses did do speech therapy. Many of them worked in the mirror and used strategies. But when we look at the character voices and the acting, people slip into a psychological state, a mind and body state, where the stuttering seems to vanish. Forward directions. I think choral reading has been very helpful for people who stutter in the clinical setting where the stuttering is so severe they really can't start reading out loud. You use choral reading and you fade away, you soften your voice, you almost begin to mumble, and they continue, and then later they can fly solo without you. So choral reading has clinical uses now, today, and will always have it. And I would love to see more research into masking when I can't hear myself, I don't stutter. And then the acting, going into a character, one with no reference for stuttering. It's basically today When I walk out on the stage at Broadway, I don't stutter. Never have, never did. But actually, I did. I've been stuttering for 25 years or 30 years. But I can slip into an identity. Because remember, the speech cortex, the striatum, is producing the speech. When I had coffee 2 hours before my performance and I was stuttering with somebody at Starbucks, well, when I get to Broadway and the drapes open, the curtains open, and it's my turn to step on stage, and I do my entire play with no stuttering, remember, my brain sends signals to my tongue, lips, voice, and control my breathing in a fashion that I never stuttered. That's interesting. I've also heard 1,000 stories of when I'm alone, I don't stutter. When there's no listener, I don't stutter. That was me in high school and college. Alone, no listener, no stutter. Have one person come in the room, just one listener, and all the stuttering comes back. That's interesting. In that case, there's no projecting. When I'm alone and no listener, I'm not projecting on my listeners. Many people have said that when they do mock phone calls, "Hi, this is Tim Mackesy. Can I speak to David Smith?" Do that 35 times without stuttering, but then when David Smith answers, I end up blocking. How is it when I'm alone, I can read out loud, do fake phone calls, and be 100% fluent, and then when there's a real listener, everything falls apart? That's psychology projecting the fear of stuttering. So, singing, masking, character voices, acting, and choral reading are all interesting, and they maybe create as many questions as they do answers. Thanks for listening.